said to himself that he's going to study a course in how to deal with people, and he studied, Dale stuff, and try it on him and see how it works. With goodwill and enthusiasm. You guys remember enthusiasm, goodwill. These two characteristics will spread to others. Write them down. Enthusiasm, goodwill, inspiration to other people in the room. It's the same thing with positivity. It's the same thing with enthusiasm. It's the same thing with goodwill. If you can spread enthusiasm and goodwill to others, they will in turn have enthusiasm and goodwill. That are happy. And the way you do that is by having the same goodwill, the same enthusiasm on others. Very important. And so he didn't begin talking about how high his rent was like probably everybody else did, because he doesn't freaking care how high your rent is. He knows how high your rent is. And he began by talking about how much he liked this apartment house. And believe me, he was hearty in his approbation and lavish. He was just saying over and over and over again on how amazing it was that he ran the building so well, and how he had such an amazing apartment, and how he would the guy, he would love to stay so much to stay for another year, but he just couldn't afford it. And he only mentions that he can't afford to stay after he spends like 5 minutes praising this guy and praising his management and praising his apartment and praising his building and building up a ridiculous amount of value and reciprocity in his life. He evidently never had such reception from a tenant. He hardly knew what to make of all this enthusiasm, all of this goodwill, of all this positive energy. This is the important part. This is the critical part. This is the crucial part. As the landlord starts to talk to him, he tells him about all the challenges and all the difficulties and everything that he has to deal with. Because in reality, he doesn't have anybody that actually cares about this stuff, that actually wants to listen to him, that actually has added enough value into his life where he realizes that he can be open with. And so it's so critical that when others start to open up to you, you shut your mouth and listen. That's exactly what he does. He listens and listens and listens to his troubles. He listens as he complains about his tenant and how he complains about how one had written him 14 letters, some of them positively insulting, asking for to pay less money, and how another threatened to break his lease unless the landlord kept the man on the floor above from snoring. And he said, what a relief it is to have a satisfied, quality tenant like you. And then, without him even asking to do it, he offered to reduce his rent a little bit. And this guy wanted a little bit more, so he named a figure that he could afford to pay. And the landlord accepted it without a word. Because once you get to the end point here, right? Like once you get to this last 10%, if you spend all of your time before this last 10% where the critical decision is made, adding value, praising, and then listening, and caring, being compassionate, being a friend, and building a quality friendship. This last little part right here, it's easy because all of the work is done here to get the decision that you want here. Vast majority of the work is done before you even ask the question, or you even open your mouth. It's all about the position that you have going into the question. And as he was leaving, he turned to the tenant and asked, what decorating can I do for you? Because all he wanted to do was add value to this tenant's life, because this tenant just added so much value to his life. And so he's literally willing to go out and invest in and decorate things for him. And if this tenant tried to get the rent reduced by the methods other tenants were using, there was no chance he would have been met with success. He would have the same failure that everybody else encountered with their, dumb ways of just trying to pay less money without actually caring about the other person on the other end of that letter. It was the friendly, sympathetic, appreciative approach that won. Exact same thing happened with Dean Woodcock of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was the superintendent of a department, the local electronic company, and his staff was called upon to repair some equipment at the top of a pole. And this type of work had formerly been performed by a different department and had only recently been transferred to Woodcock's selection, to his section. And although those people had been trained in the work, this was really the first time they had ever been actually called upon to do it. And so everybody in the organization was interested in seeing if and how they could handle it. So Mr. Woodcock, with several of his subordinate managers and members of other departments of the utility, went to see the operation. And so you've got, basically what they're doing is they're fixing this big telephone pole. So you have this big telephone pole, right? And then they're the two workers here. You got their truck, their car, their ladder, and one guy's up here trying to fix this telephone pole, fix the wire, just sitting up here trying to fix the telephone pole. And then the other guy's just sitting here. He's in the truck and he's driving and getting all the tools for him that he needs. And outside of this, there are just stacks and stacks of cars and trucks of all the executives, and everybody's here just watching these guys perform this operation and perform this task. Just standing there staring at them and just watching these two lone men at the top of this pole. And glancing around, Woodcock, he notices that there's this report, there's this guy, and he's getting out of his car with a camera, and he's taking pictures of not only just these guys fixing the pole, but also the entire scene, so all the people here. And the utility people are extremely conscious of public relations, and suddenly, Woodcock realizes that the setup looks to the guy with a camera completely overkill, and it looks like dozens of people have been called out to do a two-person job. So he strolls up the street to the photographer, and he looks at him, and he's been looking at this whole situation, and he says he realizes what it kind of looks like here. He says, "I see you're interested in our operation," and he says, the reporter guy says, "Yes, and my mother will be more than interested. She owns stock in your company. This will be an eye-opener for her. She may even decide her investment was unwise," which is freaking stupid. Like, guys, just on the low-key, on a sideball here, okay? Don't freaking make investment decisions based off of freaking news. Like, it's stupid. Just don't do it, okay? Like, you can use it as a factor with technical analysis and stuff, but it's so ridiculously stupid to think. Because this is this idea of emotions, right? People that trade off of news, or that make investments off of news, or that sell their entire position in a company because they see some dumb photograph of, 12 guys working on a light post. Like, that's emotional selling, and you don't want to base your investments on emotion. If the company's making $100 billion extra profit every quarter over the last quarter, like, they can do whatever the heck they want. I don't care if they're making more money. It doesn't matter. So, like, don't base investments off of emotions and stupid crap. It doesn't matter. Just on the low-key, okay? So back to the story, okay? And, he's been telling her for years there's a lot of waste motion in companies like yours. This proves it. The newspapers might like these pictures too. So you got a little bit of a challenge here. You got a guy that really could screw them over if he really wanted to. And so, Mr. Woodcock, he says, it looks like that, doesn't it? And I think the same thing in your position. That's critical. That's key. I think the same thing in your position. This phrase is very, 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 very powerful, because if you can convince others that you would be, because literally, if you think about it, like, if you had the same background as somebody, if you had the same experiences as somebody, if you had everything else someone else had, you would think the same thing in their position if you had their exact same perspective. And so you want to sympathize with them and understand and agree that you would think the same thing they're thinking if you were in their position. That'll put you both on common ground. It'll put you both together. It'll synchronize your mind, statements, and your actions, because you'll understand, the other person will understand that you would kind of agree with them, and it makes them think that you are on their team. But he says, look, this is a unique situation. And he went on to explain about how this was the first job of this type for the department. Now, everybody from executives down was interested, and he assured the man that in normal conditions, the two people could have handled the job. And the photographer listens to his story. He listens to this guy, this executive, because the executive listened to him, because the executive took interest in him. So you've got this massive torrential downpour on this guy's house, and he's just living, here, trying to make way, trying to live on this lot. And the challenge for him, he's got his home, and just massive, tons of rain. And as this goes on, he said that this wasn't what he's normally expecting, and because he just built this home, he didn't really have any storm drains or ditches that would normally, would have been part of next to the road. And so the water pressure built up, and there's water just kept surrounding his house, and it built up. And the pressure, as it sort of surrounded his foundation of his home, it actually forced itself under the concrete basement floor and caused the floor to explode. So his house, like, the basement explodes, and the basement got filled with water, and it ruined his furnace and the hot water heater, and it cost him so much. The damages were in excess of about $20,000 today, and he had no insurance whatsoever to cover this kind of damage because he just got his house, right? Just built it. But however, he soon found out that the owner of the subdivision had neglected to put in a storm drain near the home, which could have prevented the problem. And so he made an appointment to see him, and during the 25-mile trip to his office, he carefully reviewed the situation. And remembering the principles he learned here, he decided that showing his anger would not serve any worthwhile purpose. So when he arrived, he got very calm and started talking about his recent vacation to the west. When he felt the timing was right, he mentioned the little problem of water damage. Now, what's critical is before he talks about water damage whatsoever, he's talking to this other guy about his vacation. He's asking the other guy about his experience and about, his journey at the West Indies, and he's caring about what he cares about, right? And by the time he spends like all this time right here, this is all time that he's spending talking to the other guy about his vacation, and then only at the end does he actually mention anything about the water dam. And because he spent all this time right here building up tons of value, he quickly agreed to do his share in helping correct the problem. And a few days later, he said he would pay for the damage and put in a storm drain to prevent the same thing from happening. And even though it was the fault of the owner of the subdivision. If this guy had not begun in a friendly way, there would have been a great deal of difficulty in getting him to agree to the total liability. It would have been really, really tough to convince him to actually help and actually work with him, because in reality, he didn't have much on him. He had to actually convince him. And so if you want to convince someone of something, the most powerful and easiest way to do it is not to present them with facts or crap or something that doesn't matter, but instead to show a genuine interest, and that's exactly what he did. Very powerful concept. A couple of years ago, when Dale was a barefoot boy walking through the woods to a country school in northwest Missouri, he read a fable about the sun and the wind, and I think this is a really, really powerful one and a great way to kind of bring this to close. You know, they quarreled about which was stronger, and the wind said, "I'll prove that I am." And so they saw this old man, and you know, it says this old man's kind of walking down the street, and he's, you know, you got the sun and you've got the wind, right? And so this old man, he's standing here and he's got his coat on. And as he's sitting here with his coat, they say, you know, the wind was about which was stronger. And he says, "I'll prove that I'm stronger." And he says that, "I bet I can get the coat off of him quicker than you can." And so the sun kind of went behind a cloud, right? And the wind blew and it 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 blew. And it put so much force and pressure and just energy towards this guy trying to blow off his coat. It was almost like a tornado. But what happened? The harder that the wind blew, the tighter this man clenched his coat. The tighter he carried it, the tighter he wanted to stay together. And no matter how hard the wind pushed, he was unable to force this guy to take off his coat. Finally, the wind calmed down, it gave up, and the sun came out from behind the cloud. Wind goes away, and the sun comes out behind the clouds, and it just very, very gently, warmly, starts to smile kindly on this old man. And it just sends tons of rays, tons of just, you know, heat, it's just like a hot day, right? And so this guy mops off his brow, and he gets sweaty, and starts to pull off his coat. And the sun told the wind that gentleness and friendliness were almost always stronger than fury and force. And the use of gentleness and friendliness is demonstrated day after day. People have learned the drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gas. F. Gallon Cooper of Lutherville, Maryland proved this when he went to take his 4-month-old car to the service department at the car dealer for the 3rd time. And he told, you know, Dale that it was apparently, you know, he was talking to, his reasoning with, or shouting at the service manager that he was not gonna lead to satisfactory resolution of the problem. And he walked over to the showroom and he asked the agency owner, Mr. White. After a short wait, he was ushered into Mr. White's room and he wanted to talk to him. And he introduced himself and he explained to him that he had bought a car from the dealership because of recommendations of his friends who had previously dealt with him, and he was told that the prices are very competitive and it was outstanding service. And so he spends like the first bulk of his time right here, he spends talking about how amazing that this car dealership is. And he spends all of his time giving the car dealership and the worker and this guy, he gives him praise, right? And he says, "You're the best, you're doing amazing, I love it, you guys are awesome." And this makes this other guy smile, it makes him happy, it gives him satisfaction to know this. And then at the last little bit right here, he says, "I thought you might want to be aware of a situation that might tarnish your fine reputation." That might tarnish your fine reputation. Not that I'm struggling with or that's, you know, harmful to me or that I'm dealing with. He says, that might tarnish your fine reputation. And so he tells him about the situation. And so he thanks him for, you know, calling this to his attention, and he assures him that the problem will be taken care of, the challenge will be taken care of. And not only did he personally get involved, but he also lent this guy his car to use while he was being repaired. And he made it happen. He fixed the challenge because this other guy had added so much value to his life and made it feel so special early on. This last way they finished off, and I think it's really powerful. And it all comes down to this concept of, you know, a drop of honey will catch so many more flies than a gallon of gas. It was Aesop. He was a Greek slave, and he lived under the court of Croesus and spun immortal fables 600 years before Christ. Yet the truths he taught about human nature were just as true in Boston and Birmingham as they were 26 centuries ago in Athens. The sun can make you take off your coat more quickly than the wind, and kindness, a friendly approach, and approbation can make people change their minds more readily than all the bluster and storming in the world. And so the key, the foundation, the critical point, you want to have influence on others. You want to get to the end result. You want to overcome the challenges. You want to look at like all the difficulties that you're facing, go to that next level and have that achievement and have that success and have that community development. You want to focus on others, and most significant, you must begin in a friendly way. Think about, you know, any situation where you're asking something from somebody. How do you start that situation? How do you start that conversation? You start it by buttering them up. You start it by giving praise, giving value, showing others that you care about them before you ask for something in return. Must begin in a friendly way. Really, really critical key foundational concept here. So I hope you guys got a ton of value from this module. Go out there, apply it, absolutely crush it, and I will see you in the next module. Thank you. Bye.